I stood in the darkness behind the laundry room door, the key to the back entrance still cold in my palm. The house, my house, which had been mine for nearly 50 years, smelled of new paint and unfamiliar air freshener. Just 1 week after my own son, Daniel, and his fiancée, Brianna, had rushed me off to that assisted living facility. Their moving van was parked outside. Then I heard it, Brianna's laugh, loud and triumphant. From the master bedroom, the day she stepped out was the day we officially took over this house. My heart, which I'd nearly forgotten to medicate, hammered against my ribs. I pulled out my old flip phone and hit record. My name is Margaret Lawson. I am 58 years old, a widow, and until a week ago, I lived alone in the modest, one-story house in Harbour Falls, a quiet American town that time seems to have forgotten. For over 30 years, I worked as a social worker at Westbridge Community Services, helping families rebuild after loss, after violence, after economic ruin. I was about to retire, the paperwork sitting neatly on my desk, when the real ruin began. The scene was set at a trendy downtown restaurant, a place I had to wear my good, uncomfortable shoes to. It was supposed to be my retirement party, thrown by my only son, Daniel, and his ambitious fiancée, Brianna Cole, but I was quickly reduced to a backdrop. The laughter around the table wasn't for my accomplishments, but at my expense. Margaret, stop squinting at the menu. Honey, Brianna chirped, loud enough for the table of 20 friends and relatives to hear. It's just a salad. You know, you're getting to that age. Right. When the eyes and the memory just fade. Her delivery was flawless, wrapped in the sugary coating of concern. Then came the main course, the house. Brianna stood up, tapping a fork against her glass of Pinot Noir. I just want to say a huge congratulations to Margaret and to us. Really, Margaret has been so wonderful. She's agreed to move into the Maple Pines assisted living community for a few months, just until we get the house ready for the wedding. And so she's safe. It's what we all want. Right peace of mind. I hadn't agreed. I had agreed to visit, to humor them. But now, in front of the local newspaper editor, my cousins, and my favorite niece, it was fact. The blood rushed to my head. Brianna, that's not exactly. I started, but Daniel cut me off. His face flushed. He was trapped between the woman he loved and the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. And he chose the easy way out. He walked over to my chair, put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a restraining order, and spoke softly. But the words were a gunshot. Mum, Brianna and I need our space. We're starting our life. You have to learn to let the house go. Let the house go. The house Thomas and I built. The house my father had warned me to guard. That sentence hit me harder than any of my professional disappointments. I had been expelled. I didn't cause a scene. A social worker knows how to navigate conflict. And sometimes, that means signing the paperwork to buy time. I nodded curtly, my hand shaking as I signed the trial agreement for Maple Pines, promising to give it a 2-month trial. I was avoiding a public fight, but deep down, a cold, hard suspicion set in this wasn't a trial. This was a permanent eviction. That night, I went through the house, packing what felt like the pieces of my life. The wooden carving of a loon Thomas made, Daniel's kindergarten drawings taped inside my wardrobe door, my parents' wedding photo, faded and creased, which had sat on the mantel since the 90s. Every object was a memory, a contract to the past. This house wasn't an asset. It was a sarcophagus of love and loss. I packed quietly, the silence of the old floorboards echoing my own stunned defeat. The next morning, Daniel and Brianna arrived, their excitement unnaturally bright, like cheap paint. They rushed me into the car, barely letting me finish my coffee. Just think of the pool, Margaret, and the activities, Daniel exclaimed, avoiding my eyes. Brianna gave me a tight, dramatic hug as I reached the door, her voice a poisonous whisper. I'm only looking out for your health, Mother Lawson. But her eyes, cold and calculating, were not on me. They swept the empty living room, measuring the space, calculating the potential. We arrived at Maple Pines, a place that looked more like a hotel than a home for the elderly. As the attendant reviewed my intake forms, I felt a familiar panic. Oh, my heavens, I murmured. My heart medication. I left my nitro tablets on my nightstand. The attendant, a kind young woman, offered immediately. We can call Daniel. He'll be here in 15 minutes. But I shook my head, my mind already spinning a plot. No. Honey. Thank you. I need to take the pills now, and I've already put him through enough trouble. I'll just catch a taxi back quickly. I want to say goodbye to my old oak tree one last time. Anyway, it was the perfect excuse. The taxi dropped me at the end of the block. As I rounded the corner of Harbour Lane, my breath caught. A large, moving truck, the kind commercial movers use, was parked right outside my house. Brianna's garish, oversized patio furniture was already being unloaded. New velvet drapes hung in the living room window, and I could hear loud music and raucous laughter, the sound of a party already in progress. The new owners had moved in. I crept to the back. Thomas had installed a separate lock on the laundry room door after a minor break-in 15 years ago, and only I knew where the spare key was hidden, taped under the bird feeder. The latch turned with a familiar click. I slipped inside, cloaked by the evening darkness. The noise was louder now, coming from the master bedroom. I pulled out my old flip phone, the one with the sturdy plastic case and the incredible battery life, and fumbled until the small red icon appeared. Recording? I crept down the short hallway, my old joints creaking, heart hammering. Brianna was on speakerphone, her voice a triumphant scream that echoed against the freshly painted walls. Oh my God. I'm so relieved. The day that old woman stepped out was the day we officially took over this house. Daniel's just 2 signatures away from selling his half to me, and then we're gutting the place. No more of that musty, old lady smell. I'm finally living in a real home. I froze, pressed against the cool plaster, my lungs burning, selling his half to her, gutting the place. The shock was profound. But something else, the survival instinct I taught to hundreds of victims, kicked in. I didn't move. I listened. And in the darkness of my own home, the wife and mother was quietly becoming a predator. I was listening for the big reveal, standing in the cold shadows of the hallway, listening to the casual destruction of my life. The present faded. My mind retreated to a time when this house was a fortress, not a prize to be conquered. Thomas, my husband, was killed in a construction accident when Daniel was just 9 years old. A cruel, swift tragedy that left me with a small life insurance payout and a mortgage. For the first few years, I worked 2 jobs, social worker by day, diner cashier by night, just to keep the bank from claiming the house on Harbour Lane. I was determined to honour Thomas's memory and my son's childhood. I remembered the winter mornings in this very kitchen, the old gas stove hissing, the smell of burnt toast and strong drip coffee. Daniel would sit at the small dining table, bundled in a thick sweater, doing his homework. I would teach him not just math, but how to fold a towel properly, how to cool the sudden, fierce temper he inherited from his father. The house was our cocoon, warm and protective against the sharp winds of the world outside. This house wasn't something Thomas and I bought on a whim. My father, Henry, purchased it back in the late 60s with his veteran's loan. I could still hear his gravelly voice. The house is the one thing you never gamble with. Margaret. He left the house to me, specifically stipulating in his will that it was to be kept safe, not foolishly mortgaged or used as collateral for wild schemes. When I signed the simple, clear deed after Dad passed, the elderly lawyer, Mr. Henderson, looked over his reading glasses and gave me one piece of advice that stuck. The house is in both your name and Daniel's, but you have the final say until you're either incompetent or you voluntarily sign it away. Don't sign any more papers without letting me look at them first. Daniel grew up on these 700 square feet of land. He taught himself to fix the leaky pipes, mow the lawn with Thomas's rusty old push mower, and he used to sketch his dreams on napkins. One day, Mom, I'll rebuild this porch for you. I'm going to raise my kids right here, just like you raised me. While I was out working at Westbridge, helping victims of domestic violence find safe harbor, find a roof that wouldn't betray them. I was also home every evening, patching the small cracks in my own foundation. I knew the fragility of a home better than anyone. It wasn't just wood and plaster, it was trust. There were so many warm moments woven into the fabric of this space. Watching football games with Daniel on the threadbare sofa, arguing over the remote, hanging up every one of his graduation certificates from preschool to college in a proud line along the narrow hallway, planting the small oak sapling in the backyard to mark Daniel's generation. When Daniel got the job at a big tech firm in a nearby city, I threw a small party right here. Old Mr. Henderson from next door, Mrs. Kempler from the corner grocery store. They all came. Everyone used the same word, proud. That memory of Daniel returned, searing and sharp, as I stood listening to Brianna's laughter. He had stood right there on the porch, his hand on my shoulder, making a solemn vow. You will never have to leave here, Mom. I'll be close by. That promise was now a cruel joke, played out in the dark, silent hallway. The triumphant cackle from the master bedroom brought me crashing back to the present, the cold phone in my hand, still silently recording. I had spent 3 decades saving other people's homes, drawing up safety plans, teaching battered women how to protect their assets from abusers. And now, I realized with a sickening jolt, I had to apply every lesson I ever taught to myself. Margaret Lawson, the professional protector, was now the victim, and I had to learn, right here, right now, how to fight back and protect my own roof. The memory of Brianna Cole's first appearance in my life is like a flash photograph, too bright, too sharp, and slightly unreal. She was about 30 then, with aggressively highlighted hair and clothes that looked expensive, but felt wrong for my cozy living room. She worked in short-term real estate investment consulting, a field that sounded to me like legalized gambling. Her vocabulary was full of clinical jargon, capital leverage, cash flow, asset optimization. She spoke about money as if it were a clean, surgical tool, which immediately made me uneasy. The first dinner I cooked for them was my classic herb-roasted chicken. Brianna ate politely, complimenting the meal. But then she leaned back, looking around my modest, lived-in kitchen, and dropped the first hint of her true agenda. This chicken is lovely, Margaret. Truly. But if you knocked out that wall, installed an open-concept kitchen with a granite island, you could probably double the selling price of this house. It was the first time I heard my home the vessel of my memories, the promise to my father discussed like a commodity, a block of capital waiting to be leveraged. Daniel, the boy who once swore he'd never leave Harbour Falls, suddenly started speaking Brianna's language. Mum, you can't keep things the way they are forever. This would be good for our future. It's a smart move. He repeated her phrases, the same hollow sound, like a broken echo. Brianna's help began almost immediately. She suggested I meet her trusted financial advisor to look into freeing up equity from the house. This advisor turned out to be a fast-talking broker who strongly suggested I remortgage the property to invest in some speculative land deal 3 states away. I firmly refused, and that's when I saw the first genuine crack form between my son and me. You're always so suspicious. Mom. Daniel snapped, his eyes flashing anger. She's only trying to help you make money from something you're just wasting. It's her job to know about these things. The words wasting and suspicious stung, reducing my life's stability to a hoarding habit. Brianna was an expert at subtle character assassination. She would make little jokes at the dinner table in front of Daniel's friends, gentle, barbed remarks about my supposed failings. Oh, Margaret is just so sweet. But she's terribly forgetful now, isn't she? Or she's just terrified of any change. The poor dear. The whole town is moving on. But she's so stubborn. Slowly. Daniel's friends began to look at me with pity, as if I were the difficult, aging relative who was impeding progress. The next phase was infiltration. Brianna suggested moving a few of her boxes into the spare bedroom, just to make things easier, since they were getting married soon and would eventually be living here anyway. I reluctantly agreed, unable to articulate the feeling that my boundaries were being dissolved. My private space slowly annexed. One evening, I couldn't sleep. I was getting a glass of water when I heard shouting from Daniel's room. They were arguing about credit card debt and a failed investment, something to do with a cryptocurrency that had collapsed, leaving them with a loss of over $10,000. Then, Brianna's voice, cold and precise, cut through the tension. It'll all be fine. Daniel, once we get the title to that house, then we'll be stable. That sentence haunted me. It wasn't about love or even future stability. It was about getting the title. From then on, I paid closer attention. I noticed Brianna taking photos of various corners of the house, sending them to someone on her phone. I found her once, standing by Thomas's old desk in the office, rummaging through old financial records, claiming she was just looking for a pen. Each tiny detail, piled one upon the other, built into a growing terror. The final image, the one that makes me shiver now, happened the day she came over, supposedly to talk about wedding plans. She took my hand, squeezing it with false warmth. I just want you to be comfortable for the rest of your life. Mother Lawson? As she spoke, her eyes flicked downward, settling briefly on the small, simple funeral arrangement I kept on the hutch in the dining room, the dried white roses from Thomas's casket. The unconscious comparison between her calculated, cold comfort and the quiet grief of the past sent a chill deep into my bones. I knew then that she looked at me and my house the way a vulture looks at carrion. The gloves came off a few months later, shortly after my 58th birthday. Brianna walked into my living room with a thick stack of papers, a financial power of attorney document. "Just sign this quickly." "Margaret, please," she instructed, pushing a cheap pen toward me. "It's just so we can help manage things for you later, if anything happens." My company lawyer looked it over. "It's totally standard." The words from my late father's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, echoed instantly. "Don't sign any more papers without letting me look at them first." I feigned a headache, saying I'd look at it later. That evening, I quietly scanned the document and emailed it to a local attorney, Mr. Graham Aldridge, whom I'd worked with on several abuse cases at Westbridge. He called me back within 2 hours. "Margaret, you absolutely cannot sign this. This isn't a standard power of attorney. This grants them total control over all your assets. They could liquidate your entire bank account and mortgage the house immediately." His warning solidified my worst fears. Brianna was actively trying to strip me of my competency and my assets. Her next step was a calculated campaign to make me appear frail and confused. She would deliberately move my keys or my glasses, then wait for me to search frantically before finding them and saying loudly, "Oh, poor Margaret. Your memory is really playing tricks on you lately." If I mixed up a dinner appointment time by 10 minutes, she'd bring it up 3 times during the meal, then casually steer the conversation toward age-related cognitive decline in front of Daniel. The strategy escalated dramatically one afternoon at the supermarket. I had a sudden, frightening bout of vertigo and was taken to the emergency room. While I was waiting for tests, I overheard Brianna talking to the attending physician. "Yes, doctor," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm really worried. She's had some strange episodes lately. Forgetting where she lives, getting dizzy. I've been reading about Alzheimer's. Could this be the beginning?" Hearing her plant that seed of institutional doubt, the very tactic used against the victims I had helped, was a profound betrayal. I realized I was no longer dealing with a greedy woman. I was dealing with a professional manipulator trying to commit financial abuse. I acted quickly. I booked an appointment with an independent neurologist the following week for a comprehensive memory and cognitive assessment. I scored perfectly. I requested a certified letter stating that I was mentally sound and capable of managing my own affairs. I kept the original document locked securely in the filing cabinet at my office at Westbridge. Meanwhile, Daniel, thoroughly groomed by Brianna, began talking about my best interest. He brought up Maple Pines again. "Mum, my company has a special rate for their employees' parents. They call it a senior resort, not a home. Brianna even went and toured it." The pattern was terrifyingly familiar. Isolation, labeling the victim as incapacitated, followed by forced signatures, and then the complete loss of home. My professional training kicked in. I wouldn't be another case file. I secretly photocopied every document related to the house, the deed, my father's will, bank statements. I rented a small, safe deposit box at the local bank under my name only and stored the copies there. I began to play the part they wanted. I appeared more tired, more forgetful, sighing heavily when Brianna mentioned finances, letting her think her campaign was successful. All the while, I maintained a detailed private journal, logging every conversation, date, time, and witnesses present, treating the situation like a potential legal case. The inevitable arrived a week before my retirement party. Daniel and Brianna placed the glossy Maple Pines brochure in front of me. "We put down the deposit?" "Mum," Daniel said, his eyes begging me not to argue. "Just try it out for a few months." I looked at the brochure, at Daniel's stressed face, at the small victorious smirk playing on Brianna's lips. I pretended to waver for a long, agonizing moment. Then I gave a small, defeated nod. "Well," I whispered, allowing my voice to crack just a little. "If you think it's best, dear." Brianna's smile blossomed into a full, genuine picture of triumph. It was the first time I'd seen her truly drop the mask. She thought she had won the whole game with that simple, soft nod. She had no idea that I had just agreed to walk into the trap, not as a victim, but as the one setting the final, invisible wire. The day before I moved to Maple Pines, I was a ghost in my own house. The panic had been replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. I walked through every room, picking up the last remnants of myself, the important papers, the certified cognitive assessment, the last few precious family photos that hadn't already been packed. I gathered them all into a small carry-on bag and took it next door to my trusted neighbor. Ruth. Ruth. "Honey, please just hold on to this for me for a bit," I said, my voice low. "It's important, and I don't entirely trust where I'm going." Ruth, a sharp-eyed woman of 70, just nodded and squeezed my hand. "I've seen Brianna watching you, Margaret. You just tell me when you need me." Back inside, I worked quickly. I removed the entire latch assembly from the back laundry room door and replaced it with an old, separate lock I'd kept in the basement, one that only my key could turn. I locked the small safety box in my closet, but it held only cheap costume jewelry now. The only item of real value, my wedding ring, I threaded onto a simple chain and wore around my neck. With a secret stash of money I had saved over the years at Westbridge, I bought 2 micro cameras and 1 high-quality voice recorder. I spent the evening installing them, one camera hidden inside the ceramic owl on the living room shelf, pointed toward the main seating area. The other, disguised as a charging block, near the kitchen counter, aiming at the table and the hallway leading to the master bedroom. I wanted to capture their conversations, their movements, everything. When Daniel arrived the next morning to help with the final boxes, I played the part flawlessly. My movements were slow, my gaze sometimes unfocused. I handed him a large keyring full of the house keys, the official set. "Here, dear," I said, my voice slightly confused. "I suppose I won't be needing these anymore. Will I?" As I spoke, I tucked the thin silver chain holding my real key, the one for the back door, deep inside my blouse. Maple Pines was exactly what Brianna had called it, a resort. Too sterile, too cheerful, and utterly devoid of the history that makes a home. I played the role of the slightly flustered new resident perfectly, engaging the staff in friendly, yet observant, conversation. I was noting what they asked me, cross-referencing their questions with the information Brianna had likely fed them about my decline. The first evening there, I received a text from Brianna, a small message of false kindness. I hired cleaners to give the house a good scrubbing. "Mom, you just rest easy." Attached was a photo of the new carpet and sofa. I zoomed in on the photo. Near the front door, half hidden, was a flattened cardboard box with the clear logo of a commercial moving company. They hadn't waited even 24 hours. I called Mr. Aldridge, my lawyer. The next morning, I gave him a cautious update. I didn't tell him about the cameras yet, only about the sudden move. "Margaret, you did the right thing by leaving when you did," he advised, "but you cannot confront them yet. Let them act. Don't alert them. You need ironclad evidence of their intent to commit fraud. Keep collecting." That night, I wrote a detailed, handwritten letter to myself, explaining my preparations, my current suspicions, and my clear, competent state of mind. I dated it, signed it, and had it notarized at the facility's front office the next morning, a formal piece of evidence proving my clear consciousness. The next morning, the perfect casus belli presented itself. I truly had forgotten my heart medication on the nightstand. It wasn't a mistake. It was a gift. The nurse offered to call Daniel immediately. He's only about a 20-minute drive. I shook my head, my face etched with feigned distress. Oh, no, please. Don't bother him. He's so busy. I just need to get it myself. Besides, I added, clutching my chest dramatically, I really, truly need to go back and say goodbye to my oak tree one last time before I settle in. I'll just catch a taxi. I knew this was my only chance to catch them in the act, to check the cameras, and to solidify the evidence. The taxi pulled up silently at the curb. As I stepped out, the sight was undeniable. The moving truck's ramp was down, and the sounds of heavy boxes being dragged and people shouting directions drifted from the front door. The plan had moved past the point of no return. Brianna was pushing her claim hard and fast, confident that the rightful owner was safely tucked away and silenced. I was ready to listen. I crouched low, slipping through the back gate. The air was thick with the dust of the movers and Brianna's cloying, expensive perfume. My key, the one I'd hidden for years, slid into the unfamiliar, old lock I'd installed, turning silently. I was inside my own house, a trespasser in the shadows. The kitchen was dark, but the lights were blazing down the hallway. Brianna's laughter, high-pitched and grating, echoed from what used to be my and Thomas's bedroom. I could hear the rhythmic thump of objects being dropped and Daniel's voice, muffled and distant. I pressed the record button on the old flip phone, shoved it deep into the pocket of my cardigan, and moved toward the sound. The master bedroom door was ajar. The space inside was unrecognizable. The old floral wallpaper gone, replaced by a cold, grey tone. The bedding was a slippery, black satin, and the air conditioner was blasting. The room reeked of ownership. Brianna was on a video call, holding the phone up, giving a triumphant tour. Check it out. She bragged. Master suite. Baby. We're tearing down this wall to expand and put in a full walk-in closet. The old lady's not coming back. We've handled the paperwork. Her friend on the other end, a tinny voice, asked, Is Daniel really going to sign off on it? Though it's still partly his. Brianna scoffed, a truly venomous sound. Daniel is soft as butter. I just have to cry a little. Mention the baby in my belly, and he signs whatever I put in front of him. The next step is getting a doctor to sign off that the old bat is incompetent, and then the court will force her out completely. My hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Incompetent. I had the certified letter in a bank vault that said otherwise. But then she revealed the true extent of her criminality. I've already submitted the mortgage application, Brianna continued, lowering her voice slightly, but still loud enough for the microphone in my pocket to catch. She picked up a sheet of paper. Look at this. I've been practicing her signature for 3 weeks. It's perfect. I even got her old password out of her computer when she was in the emergency room last month. This house is free money. Baby? I felt a wave of nausea. Falsifying signatures for a mortgage application was not just domestic treachery, it was a federal offense. Daniel walked in then, carrying a stack of new towels. He looked hesitant, rubbing the back of his neck. Hey, honey, You need to keep it down. I don't want Mom to hate me forever. Brianna instantly dropped the bravado and turned on the tears. You're thinking about your mother more than you're thinking about our child, she wailed, her voice cracking expertly. You want your kid to grow up poor? Do you want to lose the house? The shift was instantaneous and sickeningly effective. Daniel crumbled. He rushed to her side, whispering reassurances. No. No. Baby. Of course not. I love you. He stroked her hair, then looked around the room, settling on the hideous black sheets. He spoke the words that were worse than any shouting. Yeah. I guess this house will be yours and the baby's anyway. Mum was just holding the space temporarily. Then he kissed her, right there, in the middle of the bedroom where I had brought him home from the hospital, where I had mourned his father. Brianna abruptly ended the call and turned to Daniel, her voice now a low, chilling purr. Just get her to sign the final discharge papers at Maple Pines. Or better yet, she added, her eyes glinting, if she happened to fall while she's there, everything would be so much simpler, wouldn't it? Happened to fall. The casual suggestion of physical harm, not just financial ruin, snapped my professional caution. This was no longer about a house. It was about my survival. The sound of movers dragging a massive wardrobe toward the kitchen door forced me to move. I backed away silently, sliding the door shut, and darted through the dark backyard. I climbed the low fence into Ruth's yard, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I made it to her back door, breathless, but the phone was still clutched tightly in my hand, the recording still running. Ruth let me in, her face pale with concern. We sat in her quiet living room, the sounds of my own house muffled by the few feet of lawn between us. I played the recording. Brianna's boastful, greedy voice filled the silent room. When the recording ended, Ruth turned off the phone. She didn't look at the floor or the ceiling. She looked directly at me. Margaret Lawson, the social worker, the rescuer. Her voice was firm. 0% pity, 100% command. Margaret, it's time you used everything you've ever taught other people on yourself. The following morning, I met Mr. Aldridge in a small, windowless meeting room at the local bank, not far from the safe deposit box that held my life's backup. I handed him the old flip phone, playing the audio. I watched his face as Brianna's cold, boastful voice filled the sterile room, detailing the forged signature, the plan to have me declared incompetent, and the chilling comment about me happening to fall. When the recording finished, Mr. Aldridge, who had initially looked slightly bored, sat up straight, his expression intense. Margaret, this is a textbook case of elder abuse and mortgage fraud. This could be a criminal matter. He then examined the letter proving my mental competency and the detailed notes I had taken. His first clear instruction was, you are absolutely not to return to that house alone. Our next move was immediate and tactical. We walked straight across the lobby to the lending department. The loan officer confirmed they had received a preliminary mortgage application under the name Margaret Lawson. I produced my driver's license and quickly signed my name on a clean sheet of paper 3 times. The loan officer compared my real signature to the one on the application, which Mr. Aldridge happened to have a copy of. The discrepancy was obvious. The bank immediately put a freeze on the entire loan application process, preventing Brianna from accessing the money she thought she had secured. Mr. Aldridge then proposed the ultimate defensive maneuver. "We need to make this house legally untouchable, Margaret. I recommend we immediately sign the property over to a temporary trust, the Harbour Falls Home Trust, with me as the acting trustee." He explained that the trust agreement would contain an ironclad clause: "I retain the right to live there for the rest of my life, and the house cannot be mortgaged, sold, or borrowed against without my signature and the trustees." I wrestled with the decision. Placing the house in a trust effectively stripped Daniel of his co-ownership rights, making him feel betrayed again. But the social worker in me, the one who saw the logic of self-preservation, knew this was the only way to shield my life's foundation from Brianna's debts and greed. I signed the papers, simultaneously. Mr. Aldridge contacted the county's Adult Protective Services Division. He filed a detailed report of suspected elder abuse, attaching the recording as proof. Brianna was instantly transformed from the image of a helpful, concerned future daughter-in-law into a formal subject of a legal investigation. My role was to maintain the pretense. I returned to Maple Pines, not to stay, but to set the record straight with the director. I told him I was retracting my verbal agreement to sign any power of attorney documents while residing there. I vaguely mentioned my suspicions of financial abuse, insisting they make a note of it in my file. This preemptive move turned Maple Pines, a place meant to isolate me, into a potential witness if Brianna ever tried to fabricate a story about my care or competency. I called Daniel, my voice carefully modulated to sound strained and thoughtful. I told him I needed a few more days at Maple Pines to just think. I deliberately let 2 of Brianna's follow-up calls go to voicemail, increasing her impatience and forcing her to expose more of her plans through hurried, demanding text messages. Mr. Aldridge's final strategic suggestion was to lure them into a controlled environment. "We need to invite Daniel and Brianna to a family meeting in my office to discuss the future of the house. It will be a legal trap, where everything they say will be lawfully recorded." I looked at the temporary trust agreement. The ink was still fresh. I placed the document in my bank's safe deposit box, then reached up and touched the key around my neck. The small weight of the metal suddenly felt much lighter, transformed from a simple piece of metal into the weight of the law, standing firmly on my side. The next step was the confrontation. The small conference room in Mr. Aldridge's office felt less like a place for negotiation and more like a courtroom under fluorescent lights. I sat on one side, flanked by Aldridge. Opposite us sat Daniel and Brianna, who had brought a young, slick lawyer I'd never seen before. Brianna was dressed in a sharp business suit, radiating the cold, misplaced confidence of someone who thought she was about to close a lucrative deal. Mr. Aldridge started gently, his voice level and professional. "Thank you all for coming. This meeting is simply to clarify everyone's wishes regarding the Harbour Falls property. I must inform everyone that for the purpose of accurate record keeping, this entire discussion will be recorded." Daniel nodded automatically. Brianna, smug, agreed. "Absolutely. Transparency is key." Brianna immediately launched her offensive, leaning forward, her eyes fixed on Daniel as if directing him. "Margaret is no longer healthy enough to live alone. Graham, we just want to ensure she receives proper care." She pushed the glossy Maple Pines brochure toward me, using it as her primary piece of evidence. She swiftly moved to her objective. "That's why we need that power of attorney, so we can manage Margaret's finances and cover her care costs." Mr. Aldridge did not miss a beat. His gaze was steady, piercing through her facade. "Brianna, Did you, or did you not, prepare a mortgage loan application on the property using what appears to be a forged signature of Mrs. Lawson? Brianna's mouth dropped open. That's ridiculous. Of course not. What are you talking about? Daniel looked from his fiancée to Aldridge, utterly lost. Aldridge calmly placed a copy of the fraudulent loan application on the table, pointing a manicured finger at the signature block. He followed that with the bank's official statement confirming the application had been frozen. He then asked Daniel, his voice tinged with professional pity. Daniel, were you aware of this application? Daniel sputtered, turning to Brianna, seeing for the first time what he had been dragged into. My heart bled, but the time for sentiment was over. I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out the phone, and with a surprisingly steady hand, pressed play. Brianna's triumphant, sickening voice instantly filled the room. I've already submitted the mortgage application. The recording boasted, I've been practicing her signature for 3 weeks. It's perfect. The next step is getting a doctor to sign off that the old bat is incompetent, and then the court will force her out completely. The room plunged into a suffocating silence. Brianna's young lawyer quickly jumped up. We object. This recording is potentially inadmissible. It could be illegal surveillance. Aldridge simply smiled, a tight, satisfied curl of the lip. On the contrary, counsel. That conversation was recorded by Mrs. Lawson in her own private residence, where she has every right to record. They, unfortunately, have just incriminated themselves in the act of fraud and conspiracy. Daniel was pale, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. Brianna, he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Did you actually say that about Mom? Falling. Brianna instantly shifted tactics, scrambling to cover her tracks. She tried to cry, saying, I was stressed. It was a joke, I was just kidding. Margaret is imagining things. She was listening in. But the recording was crystal clear, her admission undeniable. Aldridge stood up, delivering the final devastating blow. The house has been legally transferred into the Harbour Falls Home Trust. It is untouchable. Furthermore, all acts of attempted signature forgery and mortgage fraud have been reported to the appropriate investigative bodies. If you, Brianna, or you, Daniel, continue to exert pressure or attempt further deceit, this entire case will be immediately elevated to criminal prosecution. Brianna snapped, all her composure shattered. She leaped out of her chair, pointing a shaking finger at me. You selfish old woman. You'd ruin your own son for a dilapidated little house. I spent an entire year laying the groundwork to take that miserable house. It was ours. Her furious, unhinged outburst, the full confession of premeditated theft, was recorded faithfully by the microphone. Daniel sank back in his chair, silent, staring at the woman he was about to marry as if she were a stranger, a truly dangerous stranger, whom he had foolishly let inside his life. The aftermath of the family meeting felt like a rapid montage of bureaucratic justice. Financial crimes investigators from the police department came to see me, taking my detailed testimony about the forged mortgage application, the coercion, and the chilling recorded line, if she happened to fall, it would be simpler. They followed up by interviewing the staff at Maple Pines, confirming that Brianna had indeed made probing inquiries about accidents and my health status. Brianna was promptly subpoenaed. Her high-priced defense attorney, seeing the irrefutable evidence of the recording and the bank documents, strongly advised her to accept a plea bargain to avoid a lengthy sentence. True to form, Brianna tried to shift the blame, claiming Daniel was the real mastermind, saying he was desperate for money. He drove me crazy to get that house. The accusation deeply shocked and angered Daniel, finally shattering the last vestiges of his loyalty to her. Daniel sought me out alone. We met in a quiet coffee shop, far from the prying eyes of the legal world. The conversation was agonizingly stiff, punctuated by long, awkward silences. He mumbled apologies, but they were hollowed out by his continued self-justification. "Mum, I really am sorry," he stammered, "but I just wanted to provide for my family's future. I wanted to be successful. You know I didn't soften. The pain was too fresh, too profound." I looked him straight in the eye. "You didn't just choose her over me. Daniel, you chose the house over the person, and you almost gave the keys to my entire life to a woman who openly discussed harming me to take possession." The words were necessary, a foundation of truth to replace the years of convenient lies. The prosecutor offered me a deal I could stand as the key witness if the case went to trial, almost guaranteeing Brianna a prison sentence and a permanent ban from the financial sector. It was the public, satisfying form of revenge, the kind that makes headlines, but it meant facing all the ugliness again in court. That night, I wrestled with my conscience. Part of me, the betrayed mother, wanted to see her pay the harshest price to let her taste the inside of a jail cell. But my 30 years as a social worker had shown me the brutal, dehumanizing nature of the incarceration system. I asked myself, what did I really want from this revenge? Was it just retribution, or was it protection and justice? When I met the prosecutor the next morning, I laid out my terms. I would cooperate fully, but I requested that the focus of the sentencing be on elder protection and restitution, not just blind vengeance. I insisted that the sentence include a permanent ban on Brianna working in any financial capacity, forced restitution for my legal and psychological counseling fees, and community service focused on aiding the elderly, a punishment that was both humiliating and educational. Cornered and facing overwhelming evidence, Brianna accepted the plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to financial fraud and attempted elder abuse. She lost her professional license, received 3 years of supervised probation, and was ordered to perform 500 hours of community service at a senior assistance center. The punishment was carefully tailored, a form of rehabilitation disguised as legal humiliation. After the short, formal court proceeding, Daniel was waiting for me outside, dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting suit he must have bought for the occasion. "Mum?" he asked, his voice low and defeated. "Are you satisfied with all of this?" I paused, letting the harsh morning sun warm my face. "It's not about satisfaction, Daniel. It's about survival. It's about setting a limit." As I walked away, a court clerk handed me a small piece of cardstock, a victim resource card. I took it, walked a few more steps toward the street, then quietly peeled off the victim label and tucked it into my purse. The odd, unsettling lightness I felt wasn't because the villain had been punished. It was because, for the first time, I had chosen myself, my own safety, over the crippling peace of silence. It was a quiet autumn afternoon when I finally came home. The house was strangely silent, hollowed out. Brianna's garish, misplaced belongings had been removed by the police after the investigation, and Daniel had taken his few remaining boxes. The house was clean, scrubbed bare, waiting like an empty stage for its rightful star. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, standing awkwardly on the porch where he had once sworn his love for his father's house. He was holding a cardboard box containing old photo albums he'd found buried in the storage room. I wanted to give these back. "Mum," he said, avoiding my gaze. "They were yours," before I messed everything up. We sat in the living room. The afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, falling on the walls that had witnessed my wedding, Thomas's funeral, Daniel's childhood. He finally confessed, his voice heavy with shame. Brianna knew my weak spot, the fear of failure, the fear of not being successful enough for my future family, not being like the other guys. She told me the house was the only way to get ahead. I did not deny his pain, but I couldn't absolve him easily either. I told him plainly about the humiliation of the retirement party, the feeling of being discarded. I spoke of the deeper injury seeing my son stand in his father's bedroom, discussing the strategic theft of my life with a thief. "You chose an asset over a person," I stated, the words clear and unsentimental. Daniel eventually asked the inevitable question. "Will you ever take the trust down? Mom, will you put the house back in both our names, like it was before I looked around the room?" My gaze falling on the small, crescent-shaped scratch on the wooden floor, the mark from the tricycle Daniel rode when he was 7. "Daniel," I said, my voice low and steady, "you're not that child who scraped the floor anymore. You are the man who chose who gets to walk through that door. And that man made a dangerous choice." Then came the final move. My personal form of justice. I wasn't going to crush him entirely, but I wouldn't leave him exposed either. "The house will remain in the trust for the rest of my life," I informed him. "When I'm gone, you can inherit it. But there are conditions written into the trust documents." I watched his face tighten. "For the next 10 years, the house cannot be mortgaged, used for any speculative investment, or sold for quick profit. And there must be zero evidence of any lawsuit involving elder abuse in your name." Daniel was confused, feeling the sting of having his right to ownership curtailed. "It's not a punishment, Daniel," I explained gently. "If you truly see this as a home, and not just as capital, these conditions are in place to protect you from the worst parts of yourself, from the greed that woman exposed in you." He broke down, the tough shell crumbling. "Mom," he whispered, the childhood term escaping his lips for the first time in years. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, only for a path forward. "Just let me come by sometimes, to mow the lawn, to fix the roof, like before." I agreed to let him have a new set of keys, but the old, worn key on the silver chain remained safely around my neck. I knew the victory wasn't absolute. It was a form of revenge tailored to my own code not to destroy the person, but to force them to confront their moral failing every time they stepped onto the property they once saw as a mere spoils of war. The story closes on my first night sleeping alone in the house since the ordeal. The house settled around me, the sounds of the old oak tree rustling outside the window familiar and comforting. I felt the empty space where Brianna's furniture had briefly stood. My fingers traced the cold metal of the key on my chest. My life didn't end with keeping the house. It began with the realization that I was no longer afraid of losing it. That was the only kind of lasting revenge a woman past 50, who had learned the hard lessons of love, loss, and self-preservation, could truly claim. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really hope you enjoyed this journey of betrayal and ultimate justice. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect. And be sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Give this video a big thumbs up and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.